Well, good evening, folks. My name is Lawrence. I'm the Executive Director for Rio Grande Alcoholism Treatment Program, serving the northern New Mexico since 1978. We are proud to bring back the Emotional Healing Lecture Series, that collaboration between Golden Willow Counseling and Rio Grande ATP. We started back in 2019. It was a vision that Ted and I had, that we wanted to expose our clients, professionals, and communities to different topics that are unique to behavioral health. So we've had other topics such as relationships, recovering from the pains of codependency, healing trauma, after sobriety, what's next, staying connected through healthy relationships, spirituality within recovery, to give you some topics, some examples of topics that we have presented. And again, during the COVID times, these have been very challenging times for a lot of folks, especially those living with addiction. But we hope that this presentation is going to be helpful to you, to our clients, and to community, and to professionals. And with that, I will turn this over to Mr. Dr. Reverend Ted Wiard.
Lawrence, thank you very much. And Rio Grande ATP, thank you very much. Really appreciate all the work. And I know Lori, Francis, Rachel, to have this happen tonight took a lot of work electronically, allowing people to be here from Alaska, from New York, from California, from Oregon, from Texas, Kansas, New Mexico. And so really appreciative of this. Golden Willow Retreat long ago started to have breakfast, trying to bring our community together in the Taos area and bringing different organizations together, allowing us that chance to share how we're giving services. So we'd have breakfasts and they were going well and we were working well. And then COVID hit and they ended. And before that, Lawrence and I got together and we decided we would like to have an evening lecture series just promoting emotional sobriety, emotional healing in all the different forms. And so when COVID hit, we all became in shock. And now we started up in this new way, as we've all adapted, which we'll be talking about tonight, of how do we still come together, have information, share recovery, and work together to allow us to still have that collective healing in the midst of a very strange time. So I asked Lawrence if we could have this first one be on turbulent times, especially COVID. We haven't been talking about it. We've all been kind of hiding from it, and not really hiding from it, but just retracted. And so tonight we'll talk a lot about that. So welcome, and my family, welcome as well. And if we can move to the PowerPoint world. And with that said, let's go and start. So there's my personal information. Besides being the clinical director at Rio Grande, I'm also the founder of Golden Willow Retreat, as well as Golden Willow Counseling. And so the three of us have tried to get together and keep people connected during a very strange time. Tonight, it does take a lot. We might not know it. We might be here for different reasons. It might feel mandatory. It might not feel mandatory. We have all walks of life in the room, and I sure appreciate that. But just being here when a topic is grief and trauma and COVID, it takes a lot of bravery to walk through those resistance. So you're going off a jump into the unknown, and your psyche is trusting you to be there with that. So I really appreciate that. And I want to thank my family. You know, in so many of these talks, I talk about not having family during different times of losses in my life, because it becomes very self-absorbed and it might feel that way. But this group, plus a few new ones, are what have had my back when I didn't think I had a backbone. And so a lot of them are here tonight, and really appreciate that. And also just the different types of support and love that has always been there, that maybe sometimes I didn't even know is there. So I thank that family. And I also thank the rest of the community, called All Family, in all the different ways. and our chosen family. Many of us, maybe our family of origin, didn't have the support that I happened to have. And so we had to pick our family, and as well as our community and our different ways of getting that support. And this whole group tonight gets to be that family as well. We're all here to continue to heal and grow, and we're here and just really appreciate family in all of its forms, all of its ways, and may we help hold one another. It does take a community to fly on by to make this all possible. Rio Grande, the different organizations, Lore Foundation, which helped us with starting a consortium here in northern New Mexico so we could help each other, as well as just one another, to really come together and each of us be that spoke that makes up the wheel of the whole. So thank you very much for community. So I founded Golden Willow Retreat 20 years ago, moving on to 21 years. And Golden Willow Retreat is an emotional healing sanctuary focused on grief, loss, and trauma out in Arroyo Hondo. And from there, we started realizing there was other needs. And so Lawrence and I got together and started Golden Willow Counseling. We also decided to team up and help Rio Grande in a time that was having a difficult time. And we've continued with that. I had a 3-month agreement, which is now 4 years, and I'm grateful for that. And so we have different places in northern New Mexico where we really honor grief, loss, and trauma. When we first came 20 years ago, I was told I was crazy and that you couldn't have a grief center because it was such a low priority and there was no funding stream and. But due to community and people coming together, we have a place where people can come physically, or they can also get all the different community services. So who am I? Who am I, this kook that's sitting up here tonight and trying to find the bravery to be here? And I just believe in this so much. So my name is Ted Wiard. I received my doctorate in leadership behaviors, really looking at leadership behaviors in the midst of transition. Really great from a leadership point of view. I received my master's in counseling with an emphasis in grief and loss, as well as a bachelor's in education. I'm an ordained minister as a non-denominational Christian minister. I believe any spirituality and religion is, if it works for someone, that's a good thing. And then, as we said, I'm the founder and director of Golden Willow Retreat, as well as Golden Willow Counseling, clinical director, private counseling practice. But really, I'm a person that's just so passionate about emotional healing and coming together to let that happen. So hopefully we can get a few flashlights out there that maybe help different people at different times. So let's see where we're going to go tonight. I did write a book called Witnessing Ted, The Journey to Potential Through Grief and Loss. Carol Poteet and I got together and realized I couldn't find this book that really just talked about loss in a way that made sense to me. And so Carol and I chose to spend a couple weeks together and then the next 6 months putting it together to come up with this idea of the journey to potential through grief and loss. So we start in that deep, deep hole and then climb through that ladder. But just standing on the ladder or holding onto that ladder, we can't hold. And so we slowly, like that dot that you can't see very well, we get to be the eagle that can fly through those clouds and find our true potential through consciously being aware of grieving and emotional healing. And you know, this work is hard and it's a brave journey. Everything in our system and our cultures and our domestication has told us this is a very private road and you had better enter at your own risk. And there's open mine shafts and it's unpredictable and there's animals and there's even methane gas. So don't go. We're so trained, just amazingly trained to not do emotional healing. And yet it should be our top priority. It would release so many different other areas where we might be tied down and help us with our physicality and our emotionality, as well as our spirituality, and maybe even get a little bit smarter. And it does take a community to support the sanctity and dignity for an individual, their families, rite of passage and journey during any type of recovery process. If we're talking in addiction, and many of us in this room tonight are working with recovery and working with addiction and addictive behaviors, it's not an individual disease, it's a family disease. And then from there, it's a community disease. So the more we can bring those in and realize together, we can beat all these issues and really work to where we can have that emotional sobriety as well as other types of sobriety. So I want to show a little film. It's a quick film, and so let's just sit back and listen for about 4 minutes.
Good. So? Want to go up? Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
As a young man, I found myself as a school teacher, tennis pro, starting out as an all-American family with a wonderful high school sweetheart wife, 2 children, really getting life going. And then in a very short time period, my brother died in a shipwreck up in Alaska. Soon after that, we found out that my wife Leslie had cancer. After 2 years of her journey, she died as well. I started out now as a single dad with 2 little children, trying to figure out this world. And then after those 2 years, my daughters Carrie and Amy and my mother-in-law Rachel died in a car crash. This is where my daughters got hit. The truck hit right here in this intersection. And your stepdad's behind. And ended up where that big cross is over there. So when the trash truck hit the girls in that intersection, they ended up here. Amy died right away, and Rachel, my mother-in-law, died right away. Carrie lived for a day, but some of the community came out and put these 3 crosses here. And the whole town was so shattered. And I got up the next morning and wrote their service, and actually broke down. It was about 5 in the morning, and really broke down of just, I shouldn't be so good at this. I left house. Everything was just so sharp and so painful. It was more than salt in a wound. Everywhere I looked, I saw Carrie, Amy, Leslie, Richard, my life.
You were debating whether or not to kill yourself.
Correct. It's if this agony is what the rest of my life is going to be, this excruciating agony, then I need to be done with my life.
How did you turn around from this? Was there a moment of decision?
I chose to check myself into a treatment center for alcohol and drugs, and I didn't do either. And luckily, I was accepted. Those 28 days of being held in a cocoon to just find me again. It was like a spaceship had picked me up and taken me to their planet, allowed me the time to heal, find myself, find my true self, let go of dysfunctional behaviors, and really let go of the craving. I was craving those girls so bad. I just wanted to hold Carrie and Amy one more time. The way I made the decision to open up Golden Willow Retreat and be co-founders with my present wife, Marcella, and transform all of that pain into what I do now of trying to help people was actually by being at the treatment center and then really being rather angry that I had to go there. Very grateful, but why wasn't there just places where you could go and say, I'm sad, I'm lost, I'm scared, I am frozen, I can't move forward. And so from there, the passion came to start this. And its whole purpose is to be a sanctuary, an emotional healing sanctuary focused on grief, loss, and recovery, for people to have a place where they can come and move into that place of healing. The death of Carrie, Amy, Leslie, Rachel, and Richard are such an amazing part of the fuel that helps me and gives me the passion to do what I do. And so due to all those experiences of their deaths, I get to help others and at the same time help myself.
If you take my hand, you have my promise. I will not let you go. If you trust me with the things so dear to you, I will not let you go.
So first, in a very short time period, I almost died of something called cryptosporidiosis. And then from there, soon after that, my brother died in a shipwreck up in Alaska, Richard. And we have Alaskans here tonight, so thanks for being here. And soon after that, we had made it, here we go. So Richard had died up in Alaska, and then go ahead and click again. And then my wife got cancer. And so from that cancer, we had 2 years with that cancer. As 28-year-olds, that was quite a shock to us. And this whole COVID thing has been kind of like that same sort of bubble of having to walk through that cancer. After 2 years with dancing with that, and dancing with that difficulty of cancer and many multiple deaths within that time period, she died. And so it started out next with just me and my 2 daughters, Carrie and Amy, and go ahead and move on. And a couple of years after that, after letting her ashes go with the girls and my family and my tie, both Carrie and Amy died. So go on, Lori. They died in a car crash. Amy and Rachel, my mother-in-law, died immediately, and Carrie died the next day. And so I found myself destroyed. I just felt myself totally ruined. And that started my new path of healing and this emotional piece of emotional sobriety that helps me learn other areas. Over this last 2 years, we've walked into this whole new thing called COVID. And along with that, many other pieces. And so we have something that's now called trauma fatigue. And we have all these different areas of compounded, complicated grief and compounded trauma. And so we'll talk a little bit about the difference between grief and trauma, as well as loss, which is, they're not all the same thing. And so from there, I'm hoping tonight we can just understand grief and trauma a little bit more, and loss, and as well as how do we walk through this to our best ability. Walking is a new thing of walking from the unknown into the unknown. In the past, most of us have had some sort of platform. And now because of these last 18, 19 months, we're sitting in this unknown, but we're also having to take steps and try to do some emotional sobriety as well as find a new way in this world. Luckily, as human beings, and I believe most animals actually, we do adapt and we normalize. So the more conscious we are, we can adapt into healthy ways and normalize other healthy ways. I have my mask right here. Francis has his on the side of me as he's helping me with this electronic world. We're finding different ways of adapting and trying to normalize. So we're working on it very hard. What is recovery? Recovery we usually think of as just the world of addiction, but actually recovery is refinding balance where it's been changed. And within that, we're trying to refine that fulcrum where maybe we're in that chaotic place and bringing it back to balance. Now, I love that the definition of happiness, if you listen to the Dalai Lama, is the balance of joy and sorrow. It's not just joy or just sorrow, but it's bringing those two into balance. So as Samsa would say, is recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. And so if you look at that little goldfish, if you happen to have it on your screen, it's actually a miracle. We've normalized a certain life, and we're being asked by pressure, by ourselves, by whoever, to take a jumping leap of faith, to move to a different new world. And so our system really doesn't like to do that. And so once again, I honor each of you because by being here, you've also chosen recovery of trying to refine that balance. And just by being here, you're doing a leap of faith of trying to see how else I can bring back a higher quality of life. So there is a difference between loss and grief. They've been put together. Even on my master's, it says master's in counseling with an emphasis in grief and loss. The funny thing is we have loss and then we have grief. And so loss is any time that my foundation, my perception of my reality, the definition of me, and my perception of safety or illusion of safety has shifted, cracked, shattered, been blown apart, whatever that is, that means I have a loss. And in that loss, the old definition of me has died. And within that, I then move into grief. So grief is that process, that bridge of changing in a person's perception of their reality that helps them transform into their present time and place. When we have loss, which can also include trauma, we're caught in the past. The future is overwhelming. The two collide, and I'm in that free fall. Grief bridges the historical, all of our history, even 2 minutes ago. It bridges us to the present so we can step into the future. So they're two different things. When I first heard of grief and loss, and someone was like, Ted, you need to go to a grief group. And I was like, no way. Grief and loss? I don't like loss, so why should I like grief? And so we have to realize these are two different aspects. Loss happens. Loss is any time we're having to redefine ourselves and the world around us. Grief is that bridge that lets us have that definition to be present. So we kind of said this, and so it can cause a lot of fear, loss of trust, it depletes passion, the illusion of safety is shattered, and we cling to that past while overwhelmed by the future. So we're stretched, and at the same time, we're in a free fall. So these dichotomies are so difficult, and our brain gets pretty wild in the midst of this. And so loss is any time we're in a shift. Sometimes it might seem bigger than the other, but for our psyche, we don't have a measuring stick or a timeline. It's a lifetime process. And so we're moving back and forth. And so loss comes in many forms, and they're not always sad forms. We usually think of loss as sad, but they can be death and divorce and addiction and loss of self, geographical, financial, loss of our innocence, just where the world's not as safe as we used to think it was. Loss of ourself, our dreams, but it also includes things like marriage, graduation, having a baby, our pets, retirement. It also includes physical changes, loss of hair, menopause, any of these things. They're all losses. And each one of these rite of passages, we go through a grief process to redefine ourselves. We're in the midst of a huge, laborious process right now with this COVID of continuously redefining ourselves. And so in those, our whole foundation is rocked. And so our identity is questioned from all different aspects, from our interests to our family and friends, to our hobbies, to what is my ethnicity and how does my culture play into that, my beliefs and values. All of those are continuously being looked at. And so when we have that loss, we have the opportunity to see and really do that inventory on who am I. And I'd like to also remind myself, and as well as everyone here, grief doesn't make everything better. I'm sorry to say, I wish it was a magic wand and it just made everything better. Grief lets us be in the present. It still sucks every single day that my daughters died, and I can't have them come running over to me. So loss isn't taken away in our grief process. It can still be a major bummer. But what I can do is I can glean the information from those places and have them help me presently. It doesn't take away maybe the sadness, but I'm not confined and defined by them. So with that, let's talk about the last 2 years. 2 years ago in February, right before COVID hit, I happened to be in Maui, enjoying the day, getting ready to fly back. And then all of a sudden this news started coming out. And all of us, all of a sudden, we're trying to figure out what was going on. I was wondering if I had COVID because I'd just been on an airplane and we didn't know what it was. And so 2 years ago, we were in a whole different reality, all of us in the entire world. And in that COVID-19, this disbelief, confusion, anger, fear, blame, depression, more and more confusion. Was this fake news? Was this real news? Was this? Is this just a political statement? All these pieces were coming in, and everyone started backing up because we didn't know. And instead of having a foundation of our reality of maybe love or kindness, now it was of fear. And it actually moved to levels of trauma, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we had this thing called coronavirus COVID-19. Most of us went home. Our treatment centers went home. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know who we could be around. I'd remember coming to work and then being fearful to go home because maybe I'd give it to my wife and then maybe she'd die, and maybe then I was a murderer, or maybe I would die. And so we didn't know what this thing was. And so we all backed away. And then we were trying to get things. And then we thought we had this light, maybe this new thing called the vaccine, which I personally believe in. But we had hope, and things started to move forward because science was rocking and rolling. And we kept getting more information. And it was overwhelming. It was inundating. We didn't know what to do with it. We were getting new numbers every day. Was it fake news? Was it real news? Was it social media? Was it data? Should I believe Siri or should I believe the scientists? What information? And there was still tons of sickness and there was tons of death. And people were dying no matter what was being said. And it became a scary, scary world where all of a sudden our perception of everything seemed blurred, inundating, and flooding. And then maybe we're all better. The vaccine and hope came in. More and more people choosing to get vaccinated, numbers going down, things looking better. We were going to conquer this. We were moving forward. We weren't all going to die. We were still sad. But also during this whole process, we weren't really grieving. Instead, we were just trying to survive. We were in a trauma state of only trying to survive. And the numbers were going up and down and up and down and up and down. And we were all watching the numbers. We can still watch the numbers. And the beds were full at the hospitals and we were worried at home and loved ones were dying. And we really didn't know what to do with anything or where even to stand to start rebuilding that foundation. And then there were holidays, and then there was Delta, and then there was exhaustion, and there was more fear, and there was more confusion, and there's less contact. Even tonight, it was so good to see some of these people that I haven't seen, and just even on this virtual world. But there was this big blank space. And even looking through the binoculars, there was only unknown. And we walked forward. So all of a sudden, Omicron came on, just lately, like last week. Stock market starts going down, people panic, we have holidays. We're still in the United States, well, in most places, still dealing with Delta. And so this virus still hasn't left, but we're in search of balance, trying to find things and trying to find a way to walk through this and scaffold in to that new area of life, maybe new normalcies. Maybe we grieve the historical way, but we're trying to find wisdom in the midst of so many losses. And then in the midst of all of these traumas, we have the world going on. Also, everything has become hypervigilance. So we have racism, addiction, mental health, physical health, politics, death, fear, isolation. And where is the path of recovery? So we become inundated. And so that has been our last 2 years. And I just want to recognize and honor that. So let's go on to that next place. So we might feel lost and confused, unsure, unclear, perplexed, disoriented, bewildered, and we're not sure what's next. But what we do have is communities such as this to come together and talk about them. So we're going to just take a second and let you guys think about your losses. Think about your last 2 years. Andy in the other room tonight, he said, I'm glad someone's finally bringing us together to talk about COVID and all those places. Let's just take a minute or a couple minutes, write them down or don't write them down. Think about your last 2 years and how they've been for you. And what losses you're aware of. Maybe loved ones, maybe addiction, maybe COVID. But being aware of everything and honoring that you're a survivor because you're here tonight. Allow that you get to see and honor those losses, claim them, that you're not confined and defined by them, but you're allowing a chance for your psyche to see, hear, and value all that has gone on. And bottom line, as you look back, I bet there's a big wow. It's been a very intense 2 years. And life does continue. Relationships, marriage, divorce, births, deaths, celebrations, sorrows, financial stressors, and other stressors. day by day, but we're still moving forward. We're still working with this. So hopefully tonight we can talk a little bit about how do we make that next step from an unknown to an unknown. And actually there are some known things. So let's play with those tonight. We're going to talk for a minute about emotional and cognitive regression. So as we have different loss, and we'll go into that a little bit more, we have our lifeline. And these are all the different rites of passages along my life, the entire time. And so we have this lifeline of events in our life, some good, some not so good, some in between, and really not good or bad. But just we have this lifeline. Whatever our latest loss is, we have called emotional regression. So emotionally, I am going to regress to a very young age, maybe all the way back to birth. So emotionally, I am going to regress back. There's a few reasons for this. One, my psyche and my unconscious really doesn't hold a story. It holds cellular memory. And it goes, oh, good. I have a chance to heal this thing that's been locked in my system. Also, I go back emotionally because it's trying to heal any of those pieces. Also, as I lose autonomy, my psyche gets very young and it reaches out for external sources to rescue, even though it doesn't really work. So emotionally, we regress to a very young age with the opportunity to work back up our lifeline for the chance of healing many of those things that maybe are still sitting in there. Cognitively, I also go back to a very young time in my life because my brain wants to go back and say, how did I get out of this discomfort in the past? How did I have historical times to get out of something? Now, the bummer is it also means, well, like I had a friend and his dad died when we were 12. And so we stole a case of beer and we went out to the car and we drank the beer and we threw up all over the car. Well, my brain in this state is going to go, oh, I'm supposed to get a case of beer and I'm supposed to get it and I'm supposed to go in the car and throw up. Well, from there we got in trouble. We had to clean up the car. We had to do other things. So, but my brain is going to find anything in my past. So those of you in recovery, it's good to remember that my brain is also finding anything to get me out of this discomfort. So it can be a very difficult time in that relapse prevention area. So we're trying to make sure as we go through this process that we also are picking good things from my brain that help me rather than cause instant gratification rather than long-term rewards. So mentally I go back, emotionally I go back, and then I start working my way back up this lifeline. Now, the hope is I'm healing many, many different losses and traumas as I'm working with whatever's present. So here's my present life. Things are going on, and I have this big gap in between. Through grief work, emotional healing, I build the ladder that brings me to that place. The only bummer is it looks more like this. As well as most of us have forgotten how to grieve, and so it's kind of constipated. It just sits right here and keeps re-traumatizing and causing a mess here. As I do the work, I find sobriety, I find the baseline of my foundation, I start to move up into this area. The awesome thing is these old wounds now can become scars of wisdom, which means presently, when I have a loss and I will get yanked back, instead I have a scar of wisdom from that experience that can help me in the present moment rather than yank me to the past. That's a huge piece. So we start to have scars of wisdom in my life, in our life, rather than gaping wounds. Now, if some of you are thinking about post-traumatic stress disorder, that's how that works. I get yanked back and I get caught in a wound, and my psyche actually thinks that's where I am. And I have flashbacks, I have nightmares, I have anxiety attacks. And so all these different pieces. The goal is to do the work, to turn these into scars, that give us the wisdom, or maybe even allow me to sit and stand in front of you feeling maybe that something might help. So we glean those wisdoms to help us presently. So let's talk for a minute about trauma. Trauma is a little bit different than we've talked about with grief and loss. Trauma, according to the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Standard Manual, is actual perception of threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Now that is, what have we talked about with COVID? Is that it can kill us. So we have had a constant perception of threatened death or serious injury. Chronic trauma is repeated, prolonged, invasive, and interpersonal trauma. That's where we keep having trauma, where we feel we can die, and we actually start to normalize it. So when you hear about trauma informed, that's where we're trying to move out of a trauma state, which may have been so normalized we don't even know there's another state. And so trauma is that free fall. And we hope this person, which I know he does, has a parachute, not a backpack. But if that is unknown, that is quite a trauma state. And so within that trauma state, we get caught in some of those wounds that we're talking about, and we start to heal them. So with COVID, we've had this very strong chronic trauma and trauma fatigue or COVID fatigue. In other words, we're getting exhausted. And so we talked about moving through these different stages. And so all our developmental phases are happening. We're moving in and out and back and forth, but we're trying to grow into our wisdom of our present age. And so the more we are conscious, the more we start to turn our wounds into scars of wisdom, we move and we can step with more confidence. My mom died a couple years ago, and I have been so amazed at how much I trust the grief process. So my brain isn't saying this feeling is forever. And the cliche, and cliches do come from wisdom and they get used maybe a little too much or sold a little too much. This too shall pass. I have trusted that grief process to allow me to walk with my mom, knowing those nasty moments where it's just so excruciating and I just want to die, that I will move forward in that or use. And so in that, we start to realize we can trust this natural, normal healing process called grief. So in that regression, just to put it right out there, is the whole idea is that we move back to heal old wounds. We cognitively regress back to find other tools, good or bad, that we've used. And that leads to emotional escalation. And so as my emotions go up, my cognitive world goes down. And so all of a sudden, I start to maybe not think as clearly and have less restraints where maybe I need some restraints. And also in the midst of that, as I get younger emotionally, that's where I start demanding a rescue from the outside. Drugs, people, alcohol, anything. I'm trying to get rid of this pain and I'm demanding it from an external source, where the real work is how do I take that to an internal source in order to find that rescue. Right now, we hear so many people screaming and yelling because that person or that thing didn't take my discomfort away. And actually, maybe that's not where it's at. Yes, people need to be accountable, but really it's that internal work rather than claiming others. So let's keep that in mind. We're seeing that so much right now. And guess what? When we have anger, we move to rage, which means we emotionally regress and we demand more of an external source to fix us. And so we're caught in this very difficult place that hopefully we can keep moving to how can I own what I own and how can I take responsibility for my next step. So we have this thing called a brain, and I love the brain so much. I think it's an amazing computer, and it helps me actually feel okay about myself once I understand I just have this computer that's trying to get me out of discomfort and keep me alive. And we have two parts of the brain that I like to talk about, especially in grief and trauma. We have the prefrontal cortex, And that's this whole front piece. And then we have the limbic system that tries to keep us alive. So when we are emotionally escalated, that prefrontal cortex starts to turn off. That includes when we have loss and trauma, because my brain is going down into the limbic system in order to just keep me alive. So really, in loss and trauma, I am very self-absorbed. It's about me because my computer is telling me I need to survive. And so we have this dance for the two wanting to have dominant power over the other. They actually don't speak the same language. I mean, the limbic system is saying, we just need to survive. Let's take care of these things. And the frontal lobe saying, the only way we can survive is to be all kumbaya. And the limbic system saying, there's no kumbaya here. We just need to survive. And so these two actually are in a tug of war. And we need them both. They're both very important for us to stay alive. What we want is to come to our best ability from that frontal lobe, from that higher functioning brain, and allow the limbic system to give us information, because it gets all the information first. All my stimuli goes there to keep me survive. And then I got to get it up to my frontal lobe. But there's the work. That's why it's a lot easier to get angry and find negativity in everything. And we have to do a little bit bigger push and a little bit heavier weights to get back up to that frontal lobe. So the limbic system is about survival, fight, flight, freeze, fornicate, and feast, or lack of those, as well as external sources, drugs, alcohol, addictive behaviors, and anything there. Now that is called addiction, that last piece. And so that's a viral chip that gets caught in the limbic system. That is why it's called a disease. That's why American Medical Association calls it a chronic disease. Because that says, if I don't use, I'm going to die. So any day we stay sober and we override that limbic system on that issue is a miracle. We have to step into the unknown and find something else and get back into our frontal lobe. So these are there just fighting for us to stay alive. And the one I like to really talk about is the amygdala. It's where we hold all these different memories and these emotional experiences. And that's how we start to move out of trauma, is when we have that feeling, but have a different experience rather than recycle that experience. So that part of the brain is doing this fight, flight, freeze, fornicate, and feast, or anorexia of any of those, or use. Now, the frontal lobe is where we have speech and language and our motor skills. It's also where we have values, inhibitors, love, spirituality, creativity, my personality. And so we're reward seeking, not instant gratification driven. So we're looking for that long-term goal rather than that short-term goal. We're trying to override and go for what might hurt now rather than just how do I feel get better in the second. So these two work together. And so there is a dance for dominance. Well, there's just so much good news. Sometimes I feel like I'm the bearer of bad news, but all hope. The more we understand this, the better. As we have loss and trauma, like I've said, the frontal lobe shuts down. It's very similar to a traumatic brain injury. Now, I made up this word. Well, I didn't make up the word, but I put them together as emotional traumatic brain injury. Because as my brain shuts down, I have loss of short-term memory. I have high impulsivity, I have hypersensitivity, and I have high irritability, leading to a lot of confusion. Also, I think this is forever. So quite often I think I'm sick, I'm crazy, I'm alone, and I probably am tainted and should be just discarded. And neither are true. The traumatic brain injury, there's so much improvements and we can heal. Emotional traumatic brain injury, we have that chance to heal. And as my pathways turn back on and those highways reopen, I can actually expand more than wherever I used to be. That's called emotional sobriety, emotional maturity. And so as the brain starts to reopen, we have these, but in the midst of it, confusion. And then we scaffold back to that norm and hopefully a new norm. And so the frequency, intensity, duration of more and more sober days, more and more happiness, balancing that joy and sorrow, laughter, love start to increase, where maybe some of the ways of just animalistically surviving aren't the norm anymore and are less and less. So grief is a natural and normal path of recovery to change. And in that, in loss, we regress, we start our healing, and then we scaffold in our growth as we grow and grow into more mindfulness. We lean into the discomfort, and then we come back, and we lean again until we normalize a healthier and healthier world. I just love the spiral, so I threw it in here. Here's the limbic and the frontal lobe at its best. When we're in a downward spiral, which actually means escalation of our emotions, we move into these places that don't serve us well. Boredom, pessimism, frustration, blaming others, disappointment, doubt, worry, blame, mistrust, anger, revenge, hatred, rage, using, insecurity, guilt, unworthy, fear, grief, depression, powerlessness, victim. Now, the addict within our brain wants us to go down that chute so bad, just like chutes and ladders. It wants us to go down there because then my system says I gotta use. And that's very real. The more I can become aware and build a stronger platform, instead I work my way up the spiral staircase, finding more contentment, hopefulness, optimism, and really move into a place of joyfulness, as well as sorrow, but the trust of being able to walk that piece. Maslow came up with the hierarchy of needs. I love it. It is just that triangle that we're trying to work from. Our brain needs to have from that foundation to build up. So physiologically, yeah, I need water, I need shelter, I need food, I need those pieces. As I have those, I move into safety. So I have security and protection, which means now I can move out of unhealthy isolation and different areas like that, and distractors and addictive behaviors. And I can move into more of connecting. Family, biological family or chosen family, different organizations, but I get the chance to start to connect. And we need that for our system. Within that, I start to feel better. I have a reason to be on this earth. I start to have a purpose. I can find a way of being service. And within that, we move into self-actualization, self-development, and realization. Now, it's not like we do this triangle and then go, da-da! I know the last time I tried to walk across a pond, I still got wet. So it's not trying to do that. So we move back and forth. And each time we're scaffolding up in our emotionality and we're letting that frontal lobe grow. But we claim, okay, I have a loss. I check, halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I add an S because I'm a trippy dude and I believe in grief work. So halts. And I make sure that's okay. Am I safe? Safe is huge. The way we start to have our computer move forward and grow is to have more and more time where we feel safe. There's a piece I wanted to talk about in the midst of all this life world that we're talking about and those lifelines. And that's shame. I think shame is one of the things our brain grabs onto and causes so much pain and keeps us in that trauma state. So I like to think about shame a lot. I don't like to do shame, but I like to think about shame and where am I feeling shame? Because if I'm feeling shame, I'm going to start dropping down into that other part of my brain. And I'm going to move into behaviors that don't serve me because I'm going to try to hide. I'm going to try to defend. And in all that, I'm going to be escalated more and more and more. And I'm going to be dropping more into that limbic system that leads to unethical behaviors or behaviors that don't serve me well. So if we think about shame, how do we deal with shame? Well, many parts of our life, especially early on in life, most of my decisions probably taught me more of who I wasn't than who I was. But if I hadn't learned who I wasn't, I wouldn't have learned who I was. And hopefully as we get older and have a little bit more emotional sobriety, and we're coming more from that frontal lobe, maybe I get up to 50-50. And half the time I'm making decisions that serve me, and half the time, whoop, I just learned that wasn't me. And then I get up to my present age. And what I don't want to do is what I don't want to do is beat up my younger self, because the wisdom I have today is from all of my experiences in my history. Now, what we've been taught, and it's what we do to ourselves, is we look back with that wisdom today and we go, God, I was such a doofus for doing that. Oh man, I can't believe I did that. And we were taught this. We were taught this very young. So let's say I'm a 3-year-old and I have this really cool rock, and all of a sudden I throw it through the window. What do the parents do, or whoever? Why'd you do that? You know you shouldn't have been doing that. And I don't have the vocabulary to go, I didn't know that rocks went through windows, or that you're going to be yelling at me. But now I do. Now I might still continue because I finally got some attention, but that's a whole different talk. But if we can remember for ourselves in our present state, to remember the wisdom we have today came from what we gleaned from our past. So we don't want to go back and beat up that history. We might make amends and we might have areas of that to do, but we honor that those survival skills that may now be non-productive habits taught us who we are today, taught us to move more and more into our frontal lobe rather than our survival mode. So the best thing that helped me was learning the acronym for shame, SHAME, which is should have already mastered everything. Well, if I've already mastered everything, I probably shouldn't be here anymore. I mean, I'm probably done with this school called Earth. So I can give myself a break and go, yes, I'm a human doing my best. And so I'm going to make mistakes. I'm also going to slowly learn from those mistakes to help me be more conscious in my decisions in the future and expand my muscle called discernment. So I shouldn't have already mastered everything, but as I age, hopefully, I'm gleaning more and more. So I just wanted to make sure I brought that in, because I promise you, in that time in my world where I just wanted to die, it was mostly a state of shame. And I didn't feel I deserved to be here. And so in that, to learn that, no, I haven't mastered everything, and I'm still learning. And a lot of my history taught me who I am today, and it can help me make that next step, that next part. So with that in mind, we're going to stay with that lifeline for a minute. And out at a Golden Wheel retreat, we call this the boat talk. Not Botox, but the boat talk. And so here's my boat. This is the boat of life. It's not a very good boat, but I'm not shameful of it because it's the best I can draw. I have this boat of life. And very early in life, I start having losses. Actually, even while in utero, before I'm even born. Mom has things that go on. She has anxiety. She gets in a car crash. Maybe she uses. She gets nervous. She eats some bad beans and has gas. And inside I'm going, whoa, what happened? And so that foundation. So I have cellular memory even before I'm born of grief and trauma. Now, luckily, science is finally proving this. We also come into this world with some stuff from the past. So if you don't want to believe that, genomes, chromosomal memory, you want to go the science route, or just maybe we've had many lives. I don't care. It's up to you. But science has shown that even our chromosomes, we bring stuff in. So we already have that. Then we're born. I'm glad I don't remember being born. I don't have much interest in that, but that's pretty trauma. All of a sudden I have to pee and poop and breathe for myself. And I have to look up at these humans and pretend they're my higher power because I need to be fed and sheltered if I'm lucky. And then maybe my diaper's not changed right when I want. Maybe I fall out of the crib or don't get out of the crib, or I don't have a crib. And then I get to be age 3 and I've got all these losses going on. And I say, Ted, you're now a big boy. Time to go off to preschool. Congratulations. And they're going, yay. And I'm going, no, I want to stay home and play. But off I go. And no one told me I couldn't take all the cookies out of all the bags for lunch. So I get to learn about a principle. And I get to learn I'm bad. And then they didn't tell me I had to come in when the bell rang, but then I don't, then I stay out later. And so I pee my pants, and then I'm not invited to the birthday party because I pee my pants. And so now I learn about shame. And then I've done so good through preschool. They say, Ted, you've succeeded preschool. Now you get to go to kindergarten all day. And so maybe I dream about being on the bus in my underwear, and I move forward. And at the same time, developmentally, the world is becoming bigger and bigger. So all of a sudden, the world might not be as safe as I thought it used to be. I remember so well being at a Girl Scout camp because my mom was the Girl Scout leader and I was little. But I remember the older Girl Scouts going, I'm so worried my brother's going to be drafted. And then he's going to die in Vietnam. Now, I didn't know what Vietnam was, and I didn't know what drafted was, but somehow I thought it was a really big dragon in some cave that was going to eat people. And people could say that's true. But for me, it was this unknown, but I knew the world wasn't quite as safe as I thought it was. So we have the loss of innocence. And then maybe I get a little bit older, and maybe by 5th, 6th grade, I get bullied, or I'm the bullier. Of course, there's any type of abuse, sexual, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, any types of abuse that's going on. Maybe my puppy dog dies. Maybe then I get a little bit older, puberty kicks in. So I think I'm different than everyone else. I just don't realize we're all in the commonality of all of us thinking we're different than everybody else. And of course, our body's not doing what everyone else's body's doing, and vice versa. Maybe there's sex, maybe there's loss of virginity, maybe I've stolen a car, maybe I've started using. But by the time I'm 18, 19, 20, the whole of my boat is full. And then I have another loss. That loss goes down into the hull of my boat, goes down the mast. And Betsy, you know I'm a mountain boy, so as I'm talking boat parts, just put up with me. So it goes down the mast into the hull of my boat. Now this I can't prove. It's the one part tonight I can't prove. I've already mentioned it a little bit. I don't believe our psyche has a story. It has emotions. And then in that, our emotions go up to our amygdala and parts of our brain where the library is, which means anything in here that feels like this loss is in there. So, as many of you are in recovery, I'm going to talk about my dog, Mai Tai, not the drink. Well, Mai Tai was my puppy dog that Leslie, my first wife, and I got when we were at the ripe age of 20 and 21, just getting married because we were ready to have a dog. And so Mai Tai's in there. Well, from there, Mai Tai was with us when I got sick. Mai Tai was there when we had a miscarriage. Mai Tai was with us when the girls were born. Mai Tai was literally with me and my brother the last time I ever saw him again. Mai Tai was with me when Leslie got very sick, and I just pet her and go, how am I going to take care of a 1 and a 3-year-old with a wife who's going to die? Mai Tai was definitely there after Leslie died, and Mai Tai became the best nanny. She would push the kids back into the yard walking sideways. Mai Tai was there through all of that. And Mai Tai was there even after the girls died. But a couple months after the girls died, Mai Tai died, along with Carrie's horse, Missy. So Mai Tai's death opened up this entire hull of the boat. And so all these pieces, Mai Tai gave me the opportunity to heal many things that were sitting in there. And so by consciously grieving Mai Tai, many other things were being healed. Now, some just go out the bilge pump and they're just gone. Some kind of clog up and I need to identify them as well. But over time, by seeing, hearing, valuing, and consciously observing my grief process, the whole of my boat starts to be emptied. Now, it doesn't mean I forget. And you know what? I promise you, I don't want to forget ever, Carrie and Amy. Yes, there are things on my lifeline I'd love to forget, but that's what also gives me the wisdom today. So it's not about forgetting. It's about allowing the cellular memory to be unlocked so I don't have a backpack full of stuff that doesn't serve me or shackles on my legs, allowing it instead to become the passion that moves my boat forward. Now, through self-care, through relapse prevention, through emotional sobriety, I also have the opportunity to build a keel on my boat. And then by being conscious, I can build that rudder. And I believe so much, this one I think is so cool, I can even put a little solar pack here with a tiny little motor for those days that I don't think there's any wind. So all of a sudden, I can have a boat where I have room for other losses. I've transformed my losses as wisdom to be of service, to push my boat forward. And by being conscious in my decisions, I can use that discernment to move forward, and I'm not just bouncing across the water. And this is through the grief process. Well, it's called compounded complicated grief or compounded complicated trauma. And it's where all of these things are layered on top of one another and layered. So all of a sudden, my system, pardon the expression, is super constipated. And so it's like a big sat ball. And so all the losses are right there. And so my psyche doesn't know what to do with it. So the whole idea of grief is to be able to pull out and say, aha, I'm looking at this now. Aha, I'm working on this. Sometimes, like my daughters and mother-in-law died more or less at the same time. Carrie died another day. Sometimes I will grieve Carrie and Amy, and other days I'll be just missing my boo bear, Carrie, Amy, you know? So I'm picking those different pieces. And so that's a big piece of this work. And so compounded complicated grief and trauma is a huge part. As adult, we can find ourselves in this state, and we can actually normalize it. I call it the walking dead, and definitely not emotionally sober, but we have a chance to change that. And we always have that chance. There's something called neuroplasticity. And so our brain is always willing to grow. That's what's so amazing. By being seen, heard, and valued by ourselves as well as others in healthy ways, our brain is willing to open up and make new pathways. So it's never too late. So go ahead, let's move on forward. And then we have the catalysts such as COVID-19. And we do that process that we were talking about on the board of opening up and having a chance to actually heal by being conscious. Rock on. And in that, we go into the hull of our boat. We start to see what's really in there. So for some of you, this might be your fourth step of really doing that inventory and looking at what is it? What serves me and what doesn't serve me? Now, I personally, just my own little pet peeve, I don't like character defects. I like to think of them as survival skills that have become non-productive and usually unconscious habits. Because somewhere in my time, I had a loss or a need, and I found a way in order to survive. But some of those survival skills maybe no longer serve me. And so I look and I become conscious as I work through the whole of my boat. But it doesn't mean grief and trauma isn't overwhelming and daunting. If you notice, that person's going to have a hard time jumping into that yucky water as there's a blockage there. It can be so overwhelming. And for some reason, our psyche tells us, no, don't go there. You will die. And I'm not over dramatizing. That's what our brain is trying to do, is keep us alive. So being vulnerable is part of working with grief and trauma. Yet our system says that's not going to work. So we have to override that. And it is a miracle, but very possible. And so we covered this piece of that we can get caught in this ETBI, loss of short-term memory, hypersensitivity, irritability, high impulsivity. I've also done emotional regression. Within that emotional regression, we have that area that we're high candidates for relapse. Now, please, everyone in this room has different types of relapse. Some people in here might not have substance use disorder, but it doesn't mean we don't have relapse into codependency, into rage, into jealousy. So there's many types of relapse that happen. So that's why it's so important. If we have more emotional sobriety, we have less chance of moving into negative behaviors. And so we move into the stages of grief. Now, I have to say, for my friend Ken Ross, who's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's son, we do know that they weren't stages and that they should have been phases, and there was many more than 5. But we've come to know them as the 5 stages of grief. Kubler-Ross regretted calling them stages because we think we can check off the box. Grief work, emotional healing is lifetime work. Also, they move in and out and all around. So they're always bouncing back and forth. So we have that place. Denial can also be that pre-contemplative place. I'm fine. Well, since we're being recorded here, fine is freaked out, insecure, neurotic, egotistical, or emotional. You can turn that F into whatever you want, being all up. So, but that freaked out, insecure. So we're in that place and we're fine. Or we're just not even willing to go there because we've normalized something. Somewhere in there, we get all protesting about it. And then it's shoulda, coulda, woulda, depression, I'm sad, acceptance. Now, these are the 5 that Kubler-Ross talked about. If you look at those, you can walk through the COVID phases as a collective for the world and how we've moved back and forth and in and out and all around. Less and less denial as we move forward. Let's move into the 7. And there, once again, a lot of resistance. I keep saying that because we want to honor how much work it is to move to that place. And so denial is that insulation. It tries to keep us safe, and we ebb in and out of it. Anger is a protest. This isn't what I wanted. This sucks. It's their fault. It's their fault. Oh, it's not my fault. Oh, it's now my fault. It's the protest. It actually gives us energy. Refined anger is the fuel for our passion once we have healing. Once we can become more emotionally sober, that refined anger, not the crude oil anger, but the refined anger actually becomes our fuel. This is against what I used to believe. And so we move through these places. Bargaining is the shoulda, coulda, woulda. I wish I'd done this if I had only done that. If they had done that, if they had done this, back and forth. And it doesn't even have to make sense. My brain is fighting so hard for me to still think I have control. And I am the producer, director, and actor of my own movie. But somewhere in there, it gets tired. Now, bargaining also includes, what can I do? All of you chose to be here. Now, some of you might feel it wasn't choice. But yes, you chose to be you. Each of us chose how conscious we're trying to be during these 2 hours. So bargaining is also, what can I do about it? With many clients, once they can trust me and I can just say, you know what, Memphis, that really sucks. And what are you going to do about it? And so it's us taking that piece and really starting to claim, and what can we do about it? So bargaining fits in there. Somewhere there, depression kicks in. This is situational depression. It can become clinical depression, but it's situational. I'm sad. I surrender. In other words, I'm exhausted from bargaining and denial. And so I move to higher levels of acceptance, the acknowledgement of a fact. Now, some people have a hard time with this. I believe we have to claim we have a loss. We have to claim how we have been victimized. Not that we're a victim. We claim we've been victimized. We have a change in our world. That empowers us to heal or move into a victim position where I'm now demanding an external source to save me, rescue me, which they can't do. So in that, we move from that depression into acceptance. Now, acceptance does not mean everything's cool. It doesn't mean it's awesome. It's the acknowledgement of a fact. It's claiming that fact. Where there is COVID, people are dying. And so that acceptance allows us then to decide what our next pieces are. I added two more, the unknown. The unknown is faith. The unknown is spirituality. It's grace. It's forgiveness. It's continuing to grow and heal. It's trying to be more conscious. It's more self-realized. It's all the things that happen just by doing this process, which allows us to move more to that 12th step of relocation, wisdom of service. How do I take from the physical to the metaphysical, from the concrete to the abstract? It is a fact. My daughters and mother-in-law died in a car crash, and it breaks my heart. And I would do anything to hold them today. And yet I take their passion and their essence and their wisdom and their teaching to me into my heart. They live on through me, and hopefully I can help others due to that wisdom by being of service. Even have the guts being here on the Zoom with all of you tonight. And so safety decreases trauma, allowing for grief, moving to recovery. And through connections with self and others, we start to find that. Yes, we can't do like this picture here today. This was actually at my daughter's funeral. But finding connection starts that up. There's a big difference between serenity, peace. Peace, I'm trying to have the external world be all balanced. Good luck. But I can have serenity. And that's that internal state of being that comes from within. Most days I wake up, I know something freaky is going to happen. But what I can do is clean the inside of my Star Trek force field. And I can work on my internal serenity. So as things from the external world try to ding me up, I can stay peaceful within or realize I'm not and ask for help rather than thinking I can demand the outer world be in peace. This really helped me in my growth and my healing. And so to have this sobriety, I like to break it into the 4 quadrants of sobriety. Genevieve, this is what we'll be writing on in January. And so we have the intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And I was taught, just like the deer having a hoof in all 4 directions, I can have balance. And in that balance and in that holding of safety called Mother Earth, I can have the discernment, just like a deer. I can have the curious, wide open eyes, but then I can have the wisdom when to bolt, when to hold still, when to walk, when to move, when to eat, when to drink, when not to, by having those 4 solid places. So intellectually, and you guys can think about it for yourself, these are some that work for me. I'm always trying to gather valid data so I can feel safer. Fear is lack of information. I'm always trying to learn more and stay open to learning rather than think I need to have everyone just agree with me. I'm trying to expand my thoughts. I'm willing to learn new information. I'm trying to grow intellectually. I'm open and I'm curious. Think about that for you for just a second. And emotionally, we move into healing. Healing losses, connecting, identifying and expressing feelings, exploring boundaries, being vulnerable, being sober, finding serenity. So I'm trying to bring that more serene place, being seen, heard, and valued by myself, being able to state things, being able to have clearer boundaries. Boundaries are more this direction than this direction, but what I let in and what do I let out? Physically, I try to stay in halfway decent shape. I work on my nutrition, but I do like my Jolly Ranchers. I try to have activity, and I take preventative steps so that I can decrease the chances of future things. And it's continuous care. And spiritually does not have to be religion. It might be. Religion is something that's organized, where spirituality is independent. And for some, they cross over, others they don't. That's not the talk tonight, but we can have both or one or the other. I like to do my meditation, which is not sitting still. I can pretend I'm meditating and sit still, but I'll do a walking meditation. I like to go out and chase elk around and be one with the earth. So I find time to be with self and my higher power, a higher power of my understanding. So in those 4 quadrants, we start to build. So whenever I feel dysregulated or out of balance, I look at these 4 quadrants and see where I might need to do some work. Now, it doesn't mean that they're always balanced. When a deer walks, sometimes it might have 3 legs down or 2 legs down or no legs down. So sometimes I have to, when I was working on my doctorate, I probably spent a lot more on the intellectual rather than the physical. And the emotional didn't have a lot of room. Other times I'll spend more time, but it's working on these and trying to allow them all 4. I like to see them as 4 fields of getting water, being nurtured by the irrigation to grow a field that works for me. So that's a big piece of this emotional sobriety, is how do I have these quadrants of sobriety? And so we move into self-care. I found this actually when I was up in Alaska, giving a talk there, and I just loved it so much. And it's a great way of looking at it. How do I do mind, body, spirit, and within that? And so I start to find what works for me, what's fun, what's lifelong. And within that, I start to let go of where places I have shame. I work with the 3 C's on areas where I can't control something, I didn't cause it, and I can't cure it. And I also get to look at what I can do for me and how can I heal. I look for that group support, family, chosen family, groups, individual support, family in all different ways. And then in the 4 quadrants, and I like the halts. If I'm out of balance, I halt. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Am I sad? And once again, should have already mastered everything. No, I'm still a human being doing my best. And I use a couple extra when I get nervous and think I should be curing someone else's world and taking control. So thou shalt not play God on someone else's path. And then for others, I can help support health, but I'm going to have boundaries about supporting and enabling things that aren't healthy. So we start to work with the self-care plan and working with these different areas. So we work with the quadrants, we work on our health, and we move forward. What I'm hoping is we start to build that foundation. From a foundation, we can take a step of hope. So we need a foundation of faith. There, I'm not talking religion. Faith in myself, faith in my healing, faith in a grief process, faith in emotional sobriety, asking for help, and trusting my internal world in order to take that hope, that step of hope of recovery, of emotional sobriety. So within that time, as we're building this in this very tough time where the external world just seems so insane, the more we work on how I can have more serenity and build that world within, taking out the things in my backpack that no longer serve me so I have room for the new backpack, normalizing masks, finding social distancing. Andy's room, Andy times 2's room, you can see everyone has a mask on and everyone's about 6 feet apart. You know what? 2 years ago, we would go, what's wrong with that room? Are they in trouble? And so we're also, where are we adapting and normalizing so we can be healthy in new ways and have that be okay? So we're going to open it up to everybody. But first, I just want to thank you. Please know that recovery of any kind is a miracle. It goes against our psyche. Our psyche says, no, do not be vulnerable. And yet we have to reach out that hand. And in reaching out that hand, getting support, finding those 4 quadrants for ourselves, and then reaching that out as a collective, we can change the world. I believe that strongly, and I'm not trying to win a beauty pageant. I really believe one step at a time, having that base, not being caught in the past, not overwhelmed by the future, but being present, we can take that next step to manifest a better future of emotional sobriety.